everyone, today I have an OKSew best bits for you where I take a segment of a longer tutorial and clip it so that you can see the part of that video that I think is most valuable and you can get all of the information without having to watch the full long form video. In this clip taken from the Tiny Cutter tutorial, I am showing you how to add bias binding to your bag by using a double fold bias tape sewn on, unfolded, and then wrapped around your raw edge. We're going to open it up and fold over one end about 1 inch. And then working from the center bottom of your gusset, you're going to start securing your bias tape. Consider how you're going to sew this onto your machine to determine if you're going to start going this way or this way. Start in the center. I like to place a clip first, and then we will be staple basting this bias tape all around the outside of our bag. The raw edge at the lower side of our main bag body, place a staple. Make sure the prongs are folded down. And we're going to staple the entire way around the gusset. I like to use a clip to get my placement and then place a staple between the clips. And as we come up to the curve, I like to put little teeny tiny snips, the same way as we did when we curved the gusset around the main body. We will do that with our bias tape. Making sure that the edges are well lined up, particularly at that corner where it will tend to want to pull away a bit. And then flatten all of those prongs down. You have a lot of excess bias tape here. Trim it down to be about 1 inch long. So you have about 1 inch of overlap there. And then we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to sew this around the entire edge. You may find it easier to sew with the bias tape side down so that when you're sewing the curve around here, the positioning on your machine makes it easier to navigate the rounded shape. I prefer to sew with my bias tape up on my machine, and that is so I can see that the edges are remaining nicely lined up. So you can experiment with how you like to do it on your machine. That is how I prefer to do it, but if you want to sew inside the curve, you may find that that is easier for you. I'm going to be basting again at 1/4 of an inch. I have handy my stiletto, hump jumper, and a pair of pliers as I go around to make sure I can flatten staples as I need to. If my layers start to pull away, I can pull them out with the pliers or use my stiletto to hold them in place as they go under the feed dog and my hump jumper for any bulk. I'm using a narrow foot to make it easier to get around the edge. And come back to where we started. Go ahead and remove all of those staples. Double check for the hidden staple that may be under your overlap. And we're then going to fold our bias tape over and clip it in place. I like to pull it out first. Check for any stray threads. And then you're going to fold it on the crease line around the raw edge. And then use your clips to hold that in place. Pay special attention around the curves to make sure that you've got that binding positioned correctly. There will be a little bit of excess in the curve, so just smooth that out as best you can. When you're happy with all of that positioning, we're going to sew that binding in place at 3/8 of an inch, and this time I will be sewing on the inside of the curve. Something to consider when you're sewing your binding down is the color of the thread that you use. I like to use a thread that will blend in with my exterior so that if any stitches show, it is not too obvious from the outside. Even if that thread would be seen on the inside, if my bias tape is not the same color, ideally your bias tape color will coordinate with your exterior. But if not, and you have to choose between contrasting thread on your binding or being seen from the outside, I would always have the color that will be less obvious from the outside of the bag. Consider that where your bias tape overlaps, you may have quite a bit of bulk. Keep an even seam allowance the whole way around using a shorter stitch length. Comp jumper if you need it, and just take your time. A stiletto can also help to keep your bias tape where you need it to be. And we're sewing at 3/8 of an inch all the way around. Check your binding from both sides, and if there are any places that you're not quite happy with how your line of stitches looks, then you can just go over that particular area, trim your threads, and then I like to turn that side of the bag out to make sure that it looks good before I move on to the other side. Poke the corners out of the first side. Roll the binding. Places that you may notice some irregularities or imperfections in your binding stitches are around the curves and around the bulkier areas. Those are parts that I particularly like to look at. But if you're happy with how the first side looks, then we can start working on the second side. I will have a link to the full tutorial in the description if you want to watch the rest of the tutorial for this bag pattern. Hope that helps. Thanks, everyone.